Howdy, folks. It's Friday. Thank God it's Friday. And if it's Friday, we are here with Kevin Allen. Russ, we have some pre-show stuff before we get into all the NHL news. Go ahead.
Just a quick note. The guy who wrote the Jordan book, was it Sam Smith?
Sam Smith, yeah.
He was on Chicago radio this week, and he basically debunked a lot of things that were on the Last Dance. Now, people are like, well, if he's debunking it, why doesn't he say specifically which items? But I said probably two reasons. One, he wants you to buy the book because it's in his book. And two, he doesn't want to get sued. But the one that he did bring up that he started laughing about was the pizza part, where he got sick for some bad meat on the pizza. Again, Michael Jordan had a fine career. He was the greatest player ever. Nobody thought badly of him. But you know what? He tried to improve his legacy with this mockumentary, I'm going to call it. And
that's a little.
It's not a documentary, and it's a Michael Jordan production. So whatever you want to call that,
it's a biased autobiography.
That's fine. But he tried to, and maybe this is for the younger crowd, to improve his legacy, because he probably got tired of hearing that LeBron James is considered either the best or the second best player of all time and could be better than Jordan. So I think that fueled this whole thing. But at the end of the day, I think it was good that Smith came out and said those things, only because a lot of times people, when they see things on TV, they think it's true. Right. And we lived through a lot of that, and we knew there were inconsistencies right out of the gate.
Sure. Well, Kev, one of the things, because I watched the entire 10 parts because there was really nothing else on Sunday nights. And I mean, it was clear, and I've heard this discussed. One of the things was that who was that inside source for the Sam Smith book? And one of the reasons why there was sort of a falling out between Jordan and Horace Grant was because the teammates believed it was Horace Grant. So right. I don't know whether Sam Smith was, protecting his source this many years down the line or what, but is everything 100% true in this thing? Of course not. There's always some things that people don't want to have in documentaries or biographies, but I think all in all, it was pretty good and fairly accurate.
Well, the problem is I think documentaries should be accurate. Like there's works of fiction, and we all know what those are. And, when I see a movie, and I know a lot of people, they come out and they're whining about it wasn't historically accurate. And I say, it's fiction by definition. That's right. What you go to see. But when I go see a documentary, I do expect that the research be right on. Mm-hmm. And, not that they just took their best guess or they, we sort of changed the script a little bit so it'll be a little more entertaining, which probably was the case. Yep. It didn't help that as soon as the pizza story came out, that one of the pizza delivery guys said there wasn't 5 of us at the door, there were 2.
Right.
And that to me that just undermines your credibility when you have things like that wrong, and then people start to think, well, what else did you make up? So I would have preferred they would have stuck, because the story itself was so good, they really didn't need to exaggerate.
Right. That's my whole point. Exactly.
Yeah. Right. But they wouldn't. From the point of view of the producers of that documentary, they wouldn't have had it at all if they didn't get Jordan involved in it somehow. That's why I'm looking at this potential Tom Brady documentary that they say that is going to be made, and it's going to be done by his production company.
NFL Films, Kev, as late as a couple of days ago, was not listed on the press release as a source for this Tom Brady production. Yeah. So they'll probably use highlights, but they're probably not going to use that much from NFL Films. So there's a key right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The price. I actually am good friends with the documentary. It's so expensive to try to get film for documentaries that, most of the time you choose not to do it. If you want to use like 8 seconds, it's like thousands of dollars.
Right. Well, and one last thing on documentaries before we get to the other subject. I can tell you the difference between a well-made documentary that grasps people in terms of interest, which is the Jordan documentary, and one that the subject is so morally reprehensible that nobody wants to watch it, and that's the Lance Armstrong documentary. I watched the one half of the first part of this documentary, and it made me ill because he's just such a reprehensible character that I was sort of interested to see just some of the details, but really it's like I think I know from everything that's been out there what his story is, and it doesn't interest me to find out.
I fell for it. I loved him. I wrote a great article that was in a newspaper about it. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. So, and I think a lot of us did.
I think the model for me for documentaries would be like the one they did that was a series on the scammers of the McDonald's game.
Yes.
So, where they just had the facts. They presented them straightforward. Whenever they had the conflicting memories, they just presented the conflicting memories.
Right.
And it was highly entertaining.
Yeah.
Now, it helped that they had a couple of winning personalities, but
right.
It was just a proper way to do that story.
I agree.
Stories, speak for itself.
So
go ahead.
I was just going to say, let's just do a quick note on our Major League Baseball, which right now the entire sport is sort of circling the drain. I would say it. I had the same feeling. I did. One of my first books was on the 94 strike, 95 replacement players. And I have the same feeling now that I did then. And there's not going to be replacement players, but just the same ill feeling. First, the biggest mistake now that Rob Manfred has made was, I get that he had this minor league plan, but he probably shouldn't have shoved it so hard this year during the pandemic, knowing that there was great financial constraints on a lot of minor league franchises. And so as a result, not only did he end up sacking those, but a lot of others now are going to end up going out of business, and they won't have those affiliates because the teams aren't going to fully fund all these teams. As of probably today, there'll be like 1,000 baseball players out of work. Many of them will retire because they won't have a place to play. And if you go to like my Twitter feed, you could read an account of one of them who was a Mets player where it was just sort of reprehensible the way they treated him. The book that I wrote was with a guy named Nico Riesgo, who did have a 5-game major league career. He was a replacement player. And the interesting thing was he always told me, Kevin, that the bonus babies are the ones that the teams really care about, and the rest are sort of just the guys, and if they make it, great. And now it's even gotten worse. So between that and the fact that they can't even come to an agreement, players and ownership, the sport's in real trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, that's just the way life is in terms of, when you make a huge investment, that's what you pay attention to,
Yeah.
If you buy a $100,000 cottage and a $700,000 home, you're going to pay a lot more attention to the $7,000 home than the $100,000 cottage. So,
right.
And that's the issue with the way they treat players. It has been disrespectful. Like when I followed, if you remember, I think it was on Real Sports where there was a guy pushing to try to get sort of unionize the minor league players. Yeah. He pointed out that they were making literally pennies per hour given the amount of time they spend, and they gotta in the minor leagues, you basically got to live with 4 or 5 guys in order to make it economically feasible, for you to do it. So it's always been sort of and they don't pay those guys anything, and their meal money is ridiculous, and it's.
Well, I was just struck by the story about the Oakland A's earlier this week that. And I get, billionaires become billionaires because they're fiscally responsible, or if you want to use the word tight, go ahead. But when you have an owner who's worth $2 billion and paying the minor league players would, if it was $400 a week for the rest of the season, would be less than $1 million. I don't get it. Kev, because it's like, I mean, you're talking about, it's like me giving somebody $10 based on what I make. It's like, it's not not ridiculous in terms of how much they would have to pay just to keep these players under contract and their heads above water, and they just seem to refuse to do it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that, throughout this pandemic, where you have some companies that go out of their way to make sure their employees are taken care of, and others that, just hold the line. Like this is the difference between survival and not. And there are bigger companies that that could survive even if they didn't lay off their people. So yeah, it's all that is disheartening. It's the side of sports that you don't like to hear about.
Yeah, no question. All right. We can talk about the good stuff now.
Yes. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Friday, May 29th, 2020.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology. I don't know where Gritty is in the rankings, but he still could be trailing for the mascot of the year. We'll see.
I'm Kevin Allen.
Vote for anybody but Gritty. And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Okay, a lot of news this week, Kev. We expected last weekend when the news started to pop out that there was going to be an announcement by the league. We got that, I believe it was on Tuesday, where Gary Bettman and Bill Daly held a press conference call, video conference call, and released a number of details about the reopening plan, moving to phase 2, phase 3, so on. We had John Shannon on the show yesterday, and I for once in a blue moon, I tried to take the optimistic point of view, because the one thing I did agree about with Bettman and Daly was not assigning specific dates, because they would possibly have to move things forward. And everybody seems to be commenting that, if things spike, that they could move the start of the playoffs to August. But I'm wondering whether that cuts both ways, that if things are better than expected, that they could move it earlier to late July, when the Olympics would have been on NBC and in Canada, and that window is there, and obviously the rights holders would be interested in having NHL hockey at that point. Do you think it's a knife that cuts both ways, or do you think this is they left it flexible just to push it forward if they need to? Yeah,
well, I think primarily they're thinking about having to, in case there's a surge, then they've got to push it back a little bit. But I'm sure it's possible, but I think, you got to get the players in shape. So, that's going to be, I think all of that is based on the idea of how long it's going to take them. Like I talked to a couple of general managers who said, they got to get in better shape before they can even show up at training camp. To have a real life training camp, we got to have them some of them in better shape that they're in now, because some of them haven't been able to work out other than, rollerblade through, the neighborhood or downtown, depending on where they live.
Right. Yeah. And, another interesting thing, and Mike, this may help the pushback where we feel like, hey, it might happen earlier, but they're waiting, could help players like Capo Keiko and Max Domi, because Keiko's got 2 underlying conditions. Domi's got the diabetes. And so right now they're not sure they could play. Right. But maybe with an extra month, and if things are really going better, then that'll make it an easier decision, because they're not the only 2. We know there's going to be others as well. So I guess that's probably in the equation too. Now, Kev, was there anything that Bettman and Daly discussed, or anything that was released by the league that you were surprised about, or that you sort of took umbrage with? Because honestly, I think the 24-team playoff format is fair as it can be. I know, cities like Buffalo, who missed out by 1 game, they were 25th. They're irked that they missed out on an expanded playoff, but I think it was fair to everybody. And I think the draft lottery was inherently as fair as it could be. But what did you think? Well, I thought it was sort of like the Winston Churchill quote about democracy. We locked up there for a second. Yeah, you lost me there. 24-team format
was the best possible solution. I think, all along I thought that the fairness that had to be applied to the bubble teams was paramount. Like, I don't think you could just push aside the teams that were out because it really wasn't fair to them. So the question was how to do it. Well, the problem is, this is how I saw it. Maybe people would disagree. I thought when you counted the bubble teams, 20 spots weren't enough. 24 was too many.
Right.
What you really wanted was 22, but you couldn't work with 22 teams.
Right.
It didn't work. So, so I think that's why if, Edmonton loses to the Blackhawks, or if Pittsburgh loses to Montreal, the fans are going to be really, really unhappy. And because it just feels like one of those things is going to happen, just because that's the way sports works. And, we need to have, some unhappiness. But I think they worked real hard at it and did the best they could. It's not perfect, but, it's better than some of the alternatives. And, what I like about this, if you go back and look, like, this is what the players pushed for early on.
Yes.
I've seen people comment that weren't happy with this format. They were saying, hey, look, there's the league at it again. Well, it really wasn't the league. It was everybody. Everybody was working together on this. This is sort of what the players wanted, everybody but Carolina and Tampa Bay.
And it does seem that the league is maintaining their flexibility, because they didn't say definitively we're going to go with the brackets. They're open to the potential reseeding, because It seems like the players are more interested in reseeding than the league is.
Yeah. No, this was it was a negotiation, but it certainly wasn't like a CBA where everybody was dug in. And
right.
I think people were trying to make this work. Like, how can we fill our needs as owners and your needs as players? And, this is where it really helps. I've said this before, when you're a salary cap league where everything is split, because, it's in everybody's best interest to work together, and they did. So, it'll be interesting. I have reservations. I'm totally for, coming out and playing, but, I'm worried about it because when you're in a situational, when you're thinking that the testing of positive is just going to depend on what the situation is, who knows what that'll mean. And, you can't put a hard and fast rule on it. So if one guy tests positive but nobody else does, clearly they're going to play. If it's two guys, as long as nobody else, I think they'd play. What if it's 3 on one team and 2 on another and they're playing each other? So I think there's still potential here for us to get going and then have to shut down again, just because we have no idea what's possible in terms of what we may see.
I think that's fair. Hey, Kev, about the draft lottery. So on the draft lottery show, there is a potential for chaos.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And
I don't even understand it completely.
Okay, well, I can explain it. But the most chaos would be if all the placeholders got the top 3 picks. Right. Not only would Steve Yzerman go ballistic if he was in the studio, I think he would have a sad face, if nothing else, or a mad face. But then we wouldn't even know the outcome we wouldn't even have an idea of the outcome until after the first round of round robin as to where these teams fall and and then who's going to have a 12% chance. Now, the interesting thing is, again, this is a worst case scenario. We'll get to the more likely stuff after. But teams, if that happened and nobody got one of the top 3 slots and the first pick was still open, the team who did the worst in the round robin would have a 12.5% chance of actually getting the first round pick, which is better than like the third team, I think, that's picking.
Right. It'd be the odds just below second, between second and third.
So,
but the thing is,
that would be chaos, because I don't know how they would handle it on the broadcast, because I'm pretty sure they're thinking, all right, look, out of these top 7 picks, at least 2 out of the 3 slots will be taken, and we're sure the first one's going to get taken. But, it's math. Like, you just don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I
say that again, Kev.
I support the the idea of making sure that you have all the non-playoff teams have a shot.
Right.
Just because they're playing, that's the thing. Like, this really isn't the first round. Really isn't the first round of the playoffs. It's
right. What are we going to call it? Nobody knows what to call it. The stats don't count.
Qualifying round.
Like, we don't know what to call it.
Yeah, I'm just gonna call it the play-in round. So
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, but it's I think it's the right idea, but by trying to be fair, they've really made it confusing for everybody. And what's the irony of all this is the one general manager who was most vocal in his opposition because he had courage in his conviction was the guy who could be hurt the most, and that's Steve Yzerman.
Right.
He came out when they were trying to move the draft, and he would have really benefited because they were talking about going to the old plan, where the Red Wings would only been no worse than second.
Yeah.
So they were looking at Lafreniere or Byfield.
Yeah.
But he said, well, this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing this. And I think he carries some weight. When he comes out in the open like that. So you give him credit, but he, like you said, he won't be a happy camper if he ends up fourth. And as everyone knows, I live in the Detroit area, and fans are already bracing for that eventuality. It's like we have a town full of Mike Agellos right now, so, where they're just expecting the worst for their team, and they're trying to. They've already decided they're going to end up with Drysdale, and that's the way it's going to be, and so forth. It is pretty amazing, and there's a lot of it because there's a lot of joint Red Wings and Lions fans, and they just always expect the worst in these type situations. And then adding to that, and we might as well talk about that now because it's a good segue, is Jeff Blashill was retained. Now, what's interesting about that is I've said before that if you remember in the presidential race last year, Donald Trump said at one point that he could shoot someone in Fifth Avenue, and his fan base would still be with him.
Right.
And I've maintained that also applies to Steve Yzerman in Detroit. Mm-hmm. The fan base here was so excited to have him back, and he is so worshipped for all that he did, and rightly so. Arguably, I mean, you could say there have been other guys as well, but some people think Yzerman is the greatest captain in NHL history, just because of his conversion from an offensive star to a two-way guy and playing hurt and then so forth. With all that going on, whatever he does, like if he announced that he was going to trade Dylan Larkin for a bag of pucks, you would find fans who would say, well, he must have his reasons. I mean, he needs a bag of pucks,
Right.
Just because he can do no wrong. Oh, that's what I thought. But there are a lot of unhappy people about this Jeff Blashill situation. And honestly, you can't have it both ways, fans.
Right.
And let me explain this to you. You want the team to bottom out. You really did. Like, everybody was behind this. They wanted Lafreniere, or at least a reasonable chance at him, or to get a difference-making player. And then when the team just was disastrous, almost by design, because Yzerman could have done some things to make the team better, but chose not to, because in the long run, it wouldn't have paid off for him. It was in the best interest to do that. And then when they get to the end, people said, "Oh, Blashill's got to go." The team gave up. They weren't trying. All the stuff that you hear, which is total nonsense. Well, Steve Yzerman said several weeks ago in a pretty candid interview that he thought Blashill had done a great job. That he goes to all the practices, and Blashill, he likes how organized he is. He likes his game presentation. Mm-hmm. He thought the guys who should have gotten better did. And he was pretty pleased with him. So he gave indication that he was going to, but people thought that he was going to bring in his old.
Probably thinking Gallant.
Yeah, probably. We'll wait. Were you saying Gallant because he froze up there again?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the fan base was hoping that he would get his old buddy Gerard Gallant.
Yeah.
And Gallant and Yzerman were close friends when they were line mates.
Right.
Or Peter Laviolette,
Mm-hmm.
thinking that he would be a good fit for because they want to get sort of an offensive style coach to give them a little more life up front because they had so much trouble scoring goals. But Yzerman believes in Blashill, and he does this. He marches to his own beat. There's no doubt.
Go ahead, Russ.
I was going to say, last year I attended a Red Wings Penguins preseason game, and I got a little more insight into Blashill because we were all eating lunch in the same area. He was chatty afterwards. A bunch of us were just chatting with him off the record before he went to go set his lineup. And, you could tell that the Detroit personnel that was sitting around him really liked him. Like, you could just see that instantly. Like, there's no question they like this guy. And then when you do talk to him, he's a very positive and upbeat guy and does seem to have the right answers for, what his team needs. Now, again, he can only be so good with what you have. And I think it's those things that Yzerman sees, especially considering Blashill had to know Yzerman was not going to make that team better, and it was just going to be incumbent upon him to be his own coach and do the best he could.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what he did. And I think because of that, he is not going to rock the boat with Yzerman doing things his way, and Yzerman likes that.
Right.
Well,
right. And just let me add one more thing, and then you can take off with it. But the other thing too is that if you're thinking you're going to have a new coach when this team is ready to go, now's not the time to do it anyway.
that was the point I was going to make.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, honestly, I think it's unfair to a Laviolette or a Gallant to say, this is a team that's fairly barren of NHL-ready talent other than Larkin and a few other players. And we know that over the next couple of years, guys like Sider and Veleno and the young kids down in Grand Rapids are going to move in, and they're going to try to take over NHL positions. And it's going to be a team that you're probably going to have a coach who's a good teacher to help them along. But there's not enough talent for that team to be successful. And while you have Blashill under contract, and if he's doing a good job and he's helping those players as they come up along, then it makes more sense to keep him than it does to clear him out and bring in somebody new. And if they have a year as bad as Blashill, then, this guy's a failure. Then all of a sudden, then the coach, your first coach, is off on the wrong foot. I also think that, and you saw the commonality of Blashill and what happened with Jason Botterill in Buffalo. You see organizations, Kev, right now that I think are hesitant. They're being conservative to not make changes with everything else going on right now. That they basically figure, okay, we'll stick with the guy that we have rather than change over. And I can tell you, if the Detroit fan base was pissed off that Blashill was brought back, the Buffalo fan base, some Buffalo fan put the Buffalo Sabres up for sale on Craigslist. That's how pissed off they were. There's a lot of people in Buffalo that are just looking at this team and saying this is a disaster. The Bagulas are clueless. Botterill doesn't know what he's doing. I think he knows what he's doing, but it's that after 2 or 3 or 4 years, they're fed up and they want change.
Yeah. Well, it's almost the way to do it and preserve your standing with the fan base is the way Yzerman's doing. He tells everybody who will pay any attention, this is going to take a while, and right. He's not pulling every lever, because when you pull every lever, that's when fans start expecting results immediately.
Right.
Like look at that, he's going to get us moving quickly. So Yzerman's kind of on a slow, steady climb, and I think he'll expect the team to be a little better. And they're working in the younger players. Even if they got, it wouldn't be the end of the world if they got Drysdale, in my opinion, because now all of a sudden this team without any defenseman, everybody said now would have Sider and Hronek, who's a much better player than I think people thought he was. Right. Lindstrom, played enough to sort of prove that he can play in the league. And he may not be a star, but he's going to be a credible player. So this team's going to be better next year. They have Bertuzzi can play. We all know that. Mantha can play. We know that. We sure know Larkin. And those players are all going to be more consistent as they move forward. Like Larkin plays hard every game, but he doesn't sometimes. All that hard work doesn't get him anything. And I think most of it he's still sort of sorting out. And pretty soon he'll have a great understanding of every team in the league, and he'll be able to sort of utilize his talents best.
And more.
And I think Medina will be up, and I know he had a decent season. The other thing about Seider is I had interviewed him after that preseason game, and I saw during the game, and he reiterated after how he and Blashill really did connect. And I think that's another factor here because, that's your future franchise defenseman, or at least your number 2 behind Aronik. And that's an important thing for that coach to be able to connect with that guy before he sent him off to the AHL for the season. So that was another thing where I felt Blashill really did a good job with.
I think Seider will be their number 1 defenseman by the end of next year. He should be. Yeah.
Yeah. Now switching to Buffalo, as I mentioned about Botterill, what brought a lot of attention yesterday, and I was on the conference call, was the comments of Jack Eichel, because I can tell you that we've debated about McDavid and Edmonton and when he would get frustrated with the inability of the Oilers to build a team around him. That may not be the case any longer with Kenny Holland there, but in Buffalo it is the case. They haven't made the playoffs since 2011. They miss out on the expanded playoff format by like I said, by a game. They had their end of season pressers over the last few days, and Eichel basically came out and said, "I'm fed up. I'm frustrated." Now he didn't attack the organization, but he clearly is somebody who wants to win. He had his best season this year. There were some people who even considered him a potential Hart Trophy candidate, but the team around him is just not good. It's just not consistent enough. That's something Botterill has owned up to. That's something that Ralph Kruger today discussed, and it's something that the players discussed. But it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to do something about it. And Eichel, essentially, he didn't come out and say, well, I need Botterill to go out and get more players. But by his comments, that is the frustration. This is not a talented enough team. And Russ, I'll go to you first. I don't think it's a talented enough team, and I think Eichel is a top 10 player in this league, but until they put talent around him, this is going to continue to happen, even with a coach that they like Ralph Kruger.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't even have 2 fully completed solid lines. They're close, but they're not there. They didn't have 2 fully completed solid pairings on defense. They're close, but they're not there. And that does affect a lot of players. And, even Sam Reinhart, whether they re-sign him or not, and, my thinking is they're probably going to try and trade him. But if they do re-sign him, even he needs a little more support around him. They're close. Like if Middlestat were able to play next year, that'd be a big boon, but we don't know where he's at yet. That's the big thing. We talked about this yesterday about Alex Nylander. That was a big whiff for them. Now, yes, they did get Yokoharu, but they really needed Nylander because they are weak up the middle. And like you had pointed out to me, that's why they tried to push Marcus Johansson into a second-line center spot, which was overly ambitious. There's no question about it. So, even Botterill, I don't think he could have done much more to improve the team last year. Maybe he spent some bad money. We'll see down the line. But this year he's going to have to. Like Eichel is basically telling him, you're going to have to help me here. Because, look, I mean, Eichel's contract is not indefinite there. And at some point, if teams get the impression that he is not going to stay there long term, it's going to get down to those last 2 years of his deal, and then they're going to start talking about trade. And you don't really want that because Buffalo's a great city for hockey, but that franchise, even with good money ownership, can still become unstable player-wise, where nobody wants to play there. There's not that many good players, and if Eichel were to leave, that would send ripples in that organization. Like, why would I even want to play there? So they don't really want to see that happen, and I think Kruger will have something to do with that not happening. But he needs support too. Like, there's just not enough help all around. So they've got to get better, period.
Kev. Kevin.
Yeah, the molten drive and competitiveness that makes Eichel a superior player is also, going to fuel him to say the things he does about the team. He wants to win, and I really like that about him. It can be too much sometimes, but I'd rather have a guy like him than a guy that doesn't, push his team to be better. So, it's molten, it's nuclear, but that's okay. And to be honest, and I think Russ is right on this. They just haven't made any progress at all. Botterill, I don't know that he made horrible moves, but he didn't help them.
Right.
And he was attempting to help them. He missed.
Right.
He didn't come close. And it felt like, I expected them to take a step forward and they took a half step backwards.
Right.
So, he's certainly on the spot. He's got to do a good job this summer. We could be looking, the Skinner contract could end up being that bad money that Russ is talking about. Yeah. We don't know. I mean, we'll see, but and that's going to hurt if that's the case. He's got to step it up. Like, he's got to be aggressive this summer, and he's got to change up the defense a little bit. He's got to keep tweaking that, and he's really got to shake up that top six and add to it and make it much more dangerous than it is.
Well, the thing is they've. It was an untenable situation with Ryan O'Reilly. They were forced to trade him. Now, you can blame ownership for the fact that they didn't get more back because, as I've said many a time and as I've been told by people, the Pagulas wanted to avoid paying the signing bonus, so that's why they got less in that deal as opposed to paying the signing bonus and getting, maybe a Robert Thomas or somebody like that back from the Blues. But there are other moves. I mean, once they traded O'Reilly, they thought a 19-year-old Casey Middlestat would be able to play second line center. That was asking too much too soon. They signed Marcus Johansson, who has been a winger since his days in Washington, and that didn't work out. Now, they're talking about a 19-year-old Dylan Cousins who's played a few years in the WHL and bringing him in. It's the same situation over and over. And I think that, the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over. I don't know. And the funny thing is, a reporter asked Sam Reinhart, who played center in junior, and clearly from his comments wants to play center, but he didn't. He basically said, I'm going to play where they tell me where to play. Okay, yeah, but I think he's open to the possibility of playing second line center, but they don't think he would work as a center in the NHL. So
I don't blame them in a way, but you know what? It wouldn't kill them to try it and right now they can't play now, so next preseason, try it out. I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying out if he's still there. Right. If he's not there, then obviously we'll never know, but it is one of those things. The other thing is, I'm looking, even in Skinner's last year in Carolina, he had rotating line mates. They actually put him with Lee Stempniak for a while. Right. Then he was with Stahl, Eric Stahl, for a while until he Jordan Stahl for a while, and then they also had him with Victor Rask. Right. And so it does lead me to believe that it's hard, other than Jack Eichel, to find him a suitable line mate. And so to me, that would be my number one thing, is I've got to find somebody that I believe will get Jeff Skinner going. And to me, that's what Botterill should do. Now, what could maybe start that is, we got word yesterday that those bottom 17s can make trades if they want to. If I'm Buffalo, I'm looking to do that. That would be a good step forward if Botterill can pull off some sort of trade. Even if he has to trade a second or third round pick, he needs bodies. And at the end of the day, he might be able to get somebody like that. You're not going to get a second line center, but you still might be able to get a complimentary player that could get someone like Skinner going. And then maybe that gives you the wherewithal to keep Reinhart and try him at center. Sometimes it just takes a couple of players, but clearly they need to jumpstart that offense. They really do in some way.
Well, Kevin, when it was reported, I think it was Pierre LeBrun or Elliot Friedman that reported first about teams, about the 7 non-playoff teams being able to trade with each other. The first name that Pierre LeBrun mentioned was Ristolainen. And the comments that came out from Ristolainen, he was very positive about Kruger, and Kruger was very positive about him. I think the chances of that deal happening are less than they were a year or so ago. But if they're looking to get a number 2 center, that's the guy they have to trade, because that's the guy you can get a number 2 center for.
Yeah, and then they'll have a hole on defense.
On defense, yeah.
Right. Well, Russ, what's your read on what happened to Middlestat? He just hasn't been the player that we expected him to be.
Right. So I think what happened is he was one of those guys that never played a ton of games. And I'll give Shane Malloy credit. He told me that. He goes, I worry. That's my one worry about Middlestat is he hasn't played a ton of games, right? Because he played high school hockey, right. and then he went and he made the jump. And that's the big thing is, like, in the U.S. program, you play so many games, and then to the NHL, which is a ton of games.
Right.
And so he probably wasn't fully prepared for that. Workout wise, we certainly know that he had never really worked out before, and definitely seemed like he was in better shape and did better coming into his rookie season in the NHL. But again, probably still not where it needs to be for an NHLer. And so maybe this year, those kinds of things will start to fall in place for him. But that's where I guess it was a little harder for someone like me to see that, hey, he is behind in that, because he was dominating at every level. He was great in the World Juniors. Like, every test he passed, but the test of longevity was never really tested.
Well, I'll even go further on that. When they signed him and he played, I think, 7 games at the end of the season 2 years ago, he had 6 points in 7 games. They were effusive in their praise of Middlestat. And I think in their mind, they thought, okay, he's ready. And that gave them sort of carte blanche. Okay, we can trade O'Reilly because we've got the number 2 center. Even though they're different type of players, we can replace him with Middlestat, because Middlestat is, if he's not completely ready, he's close to being ready. And then when he came into training camp, and then when he played early in that 18-19 season, he was not dominant, but he wasn't as good as he was. And it's tough to evaluate players at the end of a season when everybody,
right,
it's not the same type of hockey it is at the beginning of a year. So they misjudged him. He got sent down to Rochester. He played better later in the AHL season, but early on, it was an adjustment period for him. And right now, it's sort of in limbo with them. I mean, his name is not being mentioned in the mix of number 2 centers. He's sort of like, we don't know what we have there, and we're not sure. And that for he's a talented kid. And I also think when he played in the World Junior, Russ, he was playing with Brady Tkachuk. That was a guy who could protect him. That he really wasn't playing with anybody on the Sabres that was at that talent level.
Yeah, I mean, look, he could skate, and he certainly has a good shot, but there's more to being a hockey player than that. And so, yeah, we have to hope these other things sort of round into shape for him. That's a big deal for them, because if that is a swing and a miss, then they're in real trouble. Like, then all of a sudden now you may have to rush Cousins in. I mean, based on what might happen with the CHL anyhow, Cousins may start the season with him regardless.
Right.
And we'll see if the NHL changes their rule of, 8 games or 32 games. I think, Kev, my suggestion is if the CHL starts late, then I think they should make 32 games the norm for next year and not 8, because what are you going to do with these guys? You got to at least let them play somewhere, because otherwise some guys might be, you might have prospects sitting for a month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah, I mean, that's really going to be a difficulty. The teams that can least afford to be off for 9 months are the teams that are going to be off 9 months. These are all rebuilding teams with the young players.
Right.
And, now we're not going to start a season till December or January. And the last time they played competitive hockey was March. And we're not likely to start the AHL season on time either. So you're not going to be able to send them there. And you're not going to want to send them to Europe because, can you get them back? Yeah, it's not a good situation for teams with younger players.
Well, I'll wait till Kevin.
I do think Cousins should be up this season. I think that's the right play. You got to sell hope.
Yeah, true. But Russ, I saw something this morning about Alexis Lafreniere looking for options to play based on what's going to happen, because we don't know whether the NHL season is going to start, when it's going to start. It could start in December, it could start in January. Could he emulate Austin Matthews and go to the Swiss League for a year, or for at least for 3 months if he has an escape clause to go back to the NHL once it starts? I mean, there are players, are especially these top prospects in the first that are going to go at the top of the first round. They don't want to be sitting around dormant for 3 or 4 months. They want to be playing.
Right. All right. But another thing is with Buffalo, and this is something Botterill could fix, is their player development stinks. It's been stinking for a while, and it really has to improve. Now, a guy who's sort of getting caught and lost in the shuffle here is Will Borgen. We've been talking about Will Borgen. Now, this is a guy who played in the Olympics, and he's not good enough to play for the Sabres. Like, that's where all of a sudden I started to have a problem with the Sabres, because he looked good in the Olympics. I get it. It wasn't the same Olympic team, but you know what? There was NHL talent there, and he looked good. Now, he's played 2 seasons in Rochester, and he's been good. He's a plus defender. He's a strong kid. Why can't he crack the lineup? Why couldn't he crack the lineup? And he should crack the lineup this year.
Why, Russ? Because they had the one thing they had was too many
bad defensemen, right?
Yeah, they had Scandella. They had too many defensemen, and they played the market wrong and weren't able to trade them. And in the end, they trade Scandella for a 4th-round pick and buy out or terminate the contract of Bogosian. So they misplay. I mean, those are the situations where Botterill has been, I think, receiving the bulk of the criticism, because he has not played his cards the right way.
But this is how pathetic Rochester was last year. Jean-Sebastien Day was their leading scorer. Care to tell me how many points he had, or take a guess, Mike?
I think it was in the low 40s.
39 points led the team.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they weren't a bad team. Their record was pretty decent, but I think the average age of that team was probably 26 or something.
Yeah, he's 26. He's been.
They have a lot of AHL veterans, Kev. So I mean, their player development is something that really has to improve, because their most positive story, other than Rasmus Dahlin and the improvement of him, was Victor Olofsson, who I think legitimately was maybe a top 5 candidate for Rookie of the Year until he got hurt.
Yeah,
he was a Tim Murray draft pick. He wasn't a Botterill draft pick.
Yeah. He was. He came in and showed he deserved to be there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And look, Lawrence Palut's gone, so they, the little momentary thing they had with him with the offense they gave up on, and what's going on with Asplund? Like, why can't he seem to make the jump, or can he? And he just wasn't given the chance. Like, that's, again, these are big issues that they need Rasmus Asplund to play. They actually need him.
And a guy like Tage Thompson, who they wanted to promote.
He had an injury, right? So
yeah, he separated his shoulder and he had reconstructive shoulder surgery. So that, the guys that they thought were ready, they couldn't play because they were injured. Now, a couple things here. One, it came out yesterday, Kev, that phase 3, which is the training camps, will not start anytime earlier than July 10th. And everybody is saying that, well, it doesn't mean it's going to be July 10th, but it could mean it's not going to happen any earlier than July 10th. I mean,
right.
Where do you see this going? I mean, I know everything is flexible. We talked about that before, but I mean, do you think we're talking mid-August before we get the playoffs? Do you think it's late July? I mean, what is your feel on the situation?
Oh, I think it'll be at the end of July or the start of August. I think they'll get their training camps done in 3 weeks, or somewhere between 14 and 21 days, and somewhere there maybe it'll be 18, and then they'll get going. But I think the January start date is the worst case scenario for them. I think
yes.
Originally people think that around the league think would.
Sorry, it froze up there for a second. I don't know. I don't know how they get 82 games in if they have to start in January. To me, it's an impossibility. They would have to lower to 70 or 74 games or something like that. And you know that the NHL doesn't want to do that after losing all the money they've lost this year.
Well, I mean, they're going to, try to go all the way to the Olympics if they have to. Number one, and we're going to play a condensed schedule without an all-star game, and it's going to feel like they're playing every other night. There's no doubt about it, and it's like one of those things that the players won't be able to complain about it because it's in everyone's best interest to do exactly that.
Right? They can't let a sport lay dormant, right? I mean, it's one of those things where if they want to keep this sport in good standing, they do need to play. Like they're a sport that can't afford not to play. They're a sport that next season definitely cannot afford to not have gate receipts.
Right.
Like they need all of those things. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's an important thing. Mike, I've got a side note here, which I think is worthy of some chatter here.
Yeah.
Tony DeAngelo has announced on Twitter that he is starting a podcast called Watch Your Tone. Now, the New York Rangers generally don't like their players to be very outspoken.
Yes.
We've all known that. Kevin knows that.
Yeah.
I know that. And Tony DeAngelo is probably one of the most outspoken on the team already, and now he's going to have a podcast. I'm going to predict this will last 2 episodes, and then it will mysteriously go away or get taken down or something. But
yeah, I hope it's not being produced by Fox News.
I mean, it's just.
Well, there's a lot of potential for harm there.
There is a lot of potential for harm. Kev, that's how you know this offseason, because of the pause, has been too long. When you got a guy like that now starting up a podcast and doesn't realize the downside of it.
Yeah, no, that's not. He should. He turned his career around basically.
He did
this season with the way he played, and he should just keep his mouth shut and
absolutely.
Play well in the August here, and then start next season
and get a contract. He's got to get a contract still.
Yeah, it's funny, but I keep hearing not from the Rangers, but I keep hearing around the league people think the Rangers may still consider trading him.
Wow.
That because for financial reasons. Now, I find that hard to believe because as much as I think Adam Fox is the key to their the new look of their defense, DeAngelo is just as valuable with the season he had. So
if they hadn't traded Brady Shea, I would say that would be a consideration. But after next year, you have almost $10 million of money dropping off with Mark Stahl and Brendan Smith. So I think they have the money. So
right, but the problem is, so with this year, if it's a flat cap,
right,
they're probably looking at it like. DeAngelo, I think he's still under contract. Well, no, he's not under contract for next season. He's an RFA. He's an RFA. So what they're looking at is they're kind of still stuck with Smith since there's not going to be a compliance buyout. So that hope is gone. Right. And now you have to look at it. Mark Stahl has played probably, I'm going to guess, 3rd, 4th, or 5th most games as a Ranger defenseman in the modern era. Like, there's very few guys that have lasted this long in New York on the blue line. I don't know if they want to just release him, or send him to the AHL and give him the Wade Redden treatment. But you're dangerously close to doing that to either him or Smith again. Like,
yeah, but you can only. It's unlike Wade Redden. You can only clear a little over $1 million. So it's you're not creating a ton of room.
It's not creating a lot of room, and so. They're looking probably at that and saying, if we can't get out of that, they maybe have to trade DeAngelo because he could gain a lot on the market. And maybe they're looking at it that way, but that would hurt him because offensively, he was so good for them. Like Adam Fox will be a very good offensive player, but he won't have the offense that DeAngelo has in his game, the flashiness. He'll get points, but it won't be like DeAngelo.
Yeah.
Kev, let me ask you about this because the one thing that did take me aback, that took me a little bit by surprise when the conference call and the announcement happened earlier in the week was the list of 10 cities for hub cities, because I wasn't surprised about the 3 Canadian cities, although I'm still questioning them. And Bill Daley basically shot it down that if they don't get some sort of special consideration from the Canadian government, it's not going to happen for Toronto, Vancouver, or Edmonton. But I was surprised about Chicago and LA being on that list. I mean, what have you heard other than Vegas? Because Vegas is the one that everybody seems to think it's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I keep hearing it's going to be one Canadian city.
Okay.
So, I mean, we'll see. I don't think they're going to LA or Chicago. Both of those have been hot spots.
Right.
I just don't see that happening, to be honest. I think there's some politics here on that list.
There is.
So I think the ones that you hear are that being the front runners really are for obvious reasons. Although there's a lot of potential for danger, in my opinion, in Vegas.
Yes.
There is.
But
at least the NBA won't be there too. At least there'll be just one sport. Like, let's say the NHL had decided on Florida. Florida's already going to get the NBA and the MLS. If the NHL was there too, not only is there too many people, but then there's also a lot of problems that could arise just having 3 leagues there. So at least they'll be in a town where there's only 1 league. Right. I will say this, though. Give the Las Vegas Golden Knights credit. Their minor league team, the Henderson team, the Silver Knights, were managed to figure out a name, and it didn't take that long. I wonder if the NHL team from Seattle has noticed that.
So does that mean that the ECHL team is going to be the Bronze Knights?
I don't know, but at least they figured out this name thing very early on, and we're still waiting on Seattle. Kev, you have all the inside sources. Why are we waiting on Seattle?
Well, I still think the name they want is the name that the woman owns, the author has the rights to.
Okay.
I mean, that's would be my guess, and probably.
So you think they're still trying to negotiate?
That's what I think, but we'll see. I'm rooting for the Kraken, so
yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, we know Axe is rooting for the Sasquatch. Okay, just to end the show, because it always brings me joy to have some Toronto misery added. Today is, and I'll mention this in my blog today, and because you have to, it's the 27th anniversary of what I call the Gretzky game. What Wayne Gretzky is referred to as his best performance ever in a game, which was the hat trick against the Leafs in Game 7 of the '93 Western Conference Final. It had to be against the Leafs that he did that, by the way. And we mentioned that to John Shannon yesterday, and I made the statement, and he scoffed at it, that I think that, and maybe I'm a little centric on the Leafs, but I think that was possibly the most painful Game 7 loss of any franchise in hockey ever. But I will grant that I'm biased because it's within my lifetime and it's the Leafs. I put it out there. I said, okay, what Game 7 that you had either attended or watched was what you termed as being extremely painful for the team that lost? And I like, for me, other than that game and other than obviously Game 7 in the first round against the Bruins, which it was a first round game, so I can't say it was that painful, but still, I think the Sabres loss in 2006 to Carolina for Buffalo was extremely painful. They really didn't think they had a great chance against Dallas in '99. The Broad Street Bullies were the better team over the French Connection team in '75. Everybody thought that Sabre team was a cup winner. They got hit by injuries, and they still got to Game 7 and then lost. So that, for Buffalo, I think is an open wound for Sabres fans.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the Easter Epic for mine. The Caps were home in a Game 7 against the Islanders. It goes 4 overtimes. Pat LaFontaine beats them. The rivalry between Washington and the New York teams at that time, and they just couldn't get over the hump. And they really felt like, I think if they could have won that series, that they were going to, go further. And it was pretty devastating. They played well enough to win. the goaltending. Rudy was terrific. It was, I mean, you could have heard a pin drop when LaFontaine scored. And, it was well after midnight. It was a depressing loss for the.
I still remember Bob Mason just collapsing in exhaustion when that goal went in. I'm sorry, Kev, it froze up there. I still remember Bob Mason when that goal went in, just sort of collapsing on one knee and falling out of pure exhaustion. You could just see, on top of the physical toll that, 4 overtimes, you get a chance to move on to the next round or you're done. And, it was terrible for them. Russ, what about you?
I'm going to go with the Devils. When they lost in 94 to the Rangers in the Eastern Conference Finals, they were still termed a Mickey Mouse organization. Martin Brodeur was a hotshot goalie. They had high hopes. They lost in Game 7, even after they tied it with the Zelepukin goal, which probably gave them a lot of hope that, hey, we can advance to the Stanley Cup. The Rangers go to the Stanley Cup and they win. Now, of course, we know what happens after, but you don't know what's going to happen after that. And at that point, that had to really sting the Devils organization because they got really close. They could have shed that bad reputation that Wayne Gretzky, Mike's best buddy, put on them many years ago, and it didn't happen. And the loss was in excruciating fashion. And luckily for them, they did win the next year because that Mateau thing got played to death all throughout the summer, all throughout the holdout until they finally got the season going again. Because the Rangers held on to that cup longer than any team in the modern era because of the way, or now St. Louis is rivaling it, because of the work stoppage. But at any rate, that really did have to hurt the Devils.
And it stung even. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, that game, I agree with Ross. That was just devastating.
Yeah.
Because they might have made some noise, to be sure.
And what made it even worse, just like the Leafs and the Kings in '93, Toronto was up 3-2. They won on a Glenn Anderson overtime goal. They lose Game 6, obviously, to Kerry Fraser, the high stick. Wendell Clark had a hat trick, a comeback game. In that series, it was the Devils were up 3-2, and then there was the Messier guarantee.
Right.
So they're up 3-2, and then they lose Game 6 at home, and then they lose Game 7 in heartbreaking fashion. So yeah, that's a good one, Russ. All right, great show, guys. We will be back on Monday. We believe we will have former Leaf Darcy Tucker as our guest.
Nice.
So tune in for that. For Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thanks for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.